The Iron Meridian was not a pretty ship. It was old, dented in places, and smelled like engine grease and recycled air. It carried 3 crew members through the outer edges of known space, picking through the bones of dead civilizations for anything worth selling. It was not a glamorous job. But it paid, and Cal Dunbar had stopped caring about glamour a long time ago. Cal was 34 years old. He was built like someone who had spent years doing hard work in small spaces, wide shoulders, short hair going gray at the sides, hands that were always a little rough. He had been a colonial marine once, then a contractor, then a salvager. He did not talk much. He finished what he started. The crew liked him well enough, which was more than most captains of small ships could say. Nina Okafor was the ship's medic. She was quick and calm and had a habit of reading medical textbooks on her off hours just for fun, which Cal found strange but did not question. Pete Larson was the navigator, a big man with a loud voice and a deep dislike of anything that made his job more complicated than it already was. They were 3 days into a survey of an old alien station when Cal found the creature. The station had belonged to a civilization that no one had a name for anymore. It had collapsed centuries ago, maybe longer. What was left of it drifted in a slow scatter of wreckage, twisted metal, cracked panels, the occasional sealed container that might hold something valuable or might hold nothing at all. Cal moved through it carefully, his suit light cutting through the dark. He almost walked past it. It was tucked beneath a collapsed beam, half buried in broken material. Small. Very small. No bigger than a house cat. It had scales the color of deep ocean water, dark blue with a faint shimmer when his light hit them. It had 6 limbs, 2 of which were folded close to its body like damaged wings. One of those wings was clearly crushed. The creature was shaking, slow and shallow, the way things shake when they are very close to being done. Cal crouched down. He looked at it for a long moment. The creature looked back at him. Its eyes were large and gold and did not look like the eyes of an animal. They looked like the eyes of something that was thinking. His comm clicked on. Pete's voice came through, flat and certain. "Whatever it is, leave it. We have a contract. The clock is running." Cal did not answer right away. He looked at the creature. The creature looked at him. It did not try to move away from him. It did not bare teeth or make a sound. It simply watched him, very still, the way something watches when it is deciding whether to trust. Cal picked it up. He carried it back to the ship tucked against his chest, one hand holding it steady, moving slowly so the motion would not hurt it more. Pete met him at the airlock and stared. "You're not serious," Pete said. Cal walked past him without answering. Nina took one look at the creature and became very focused very quickly. She cleared a space in the med bay, pulled out equipment that was meant for humans and started figuring out how to use it on something that was not. The creature let her work. It watched everything she did with those gold eyes, and it never flinched, not even when she touched the damaged wing. Cal stood in the doorway and watched. The bioscan alert came 20 minutes later. Automatic, triggered the moment an unregistered alien life form came aboard. A coalition patrol ship called Warden 7 was now on its way. They had 72 hours. The alert said Cal could avoid charges by releasing the creature or surrendering it upon arrival. Pete came to stand beside him. "You know what this is going to cost us," Pete said. It was not a question. Cal knew. His license. Maybe the ship. Definitely the contract. He looked through the med bay window at the small creature lying under Nina's careful hands, its gold eyes half open, still watching, still holding on. "Yeah," Cal said. "I know." He did not move from the doorway for a long time. The ship moved toward Port Callum at a steady pace, which was the only pace the Iron Meridian knew. Cal had set the course quietly, without explaining himself to anyone. Nina had not asked. Pete had asked twice and then stopped when it became clear that Cal was not going to answer. The creature, Cal had started calling it Flint in his head, because of the small dry sparking sound it made when something startled it, was getting better. Slowly. Nina changed whatever she was using as a dressing on the damaged wing 3 times a day and watched it carefully each time. The wing was not going to be perfect. But it was not going to kill Flint either. Flint watched everything. That was the thing Cal kept noticing. The creature did not sleep much, or if it did, it slept with one eye still tracking the room. It watched Nina's hands when she worked. It watched the door when someone new came in. And it watched Cal in a way that was different from how it watched the others. Steadier. Longer. Like it was still deciding something. On the second day, Nina tried to get Flint to eat. She brought out several things, working through options the way she would with a human patient who wasn't talking. Flint ignored everything she put in front of it. She was starting to look worried when Cal came in and sat down, opened a pack of travel rations without thinking, and ate a piece. Flint watched him eat. Then it leaned forward and took a piece from the same pack, very carefully, using the small clawed tips of its front limbs like fingers. It chewed slowly. It looked at Cal, then it took another piece. Nina wrote something in her notes. She did not say anything. Cal pretended he had not noticed what just happened. On the third morning, a meteorite would have hit them. It was too small for the sensors to catch early, which was the kind of thing that happened in debris fields if you were not careful. Pete was running calculations. Nina was in the med bay. Cal was in the corridor when Flint, who had been sleeping on a folded jacket near the wall, suddenly lifted its head and made a sound. Not the sparking sound, something sharper, and looked directly at the left side of the hull. 4 seconds later, the sensor alarm went off. Pete pulled them clear. It missed by enough. Afterward, Pete stood in the corridor and looked at Flint for a very long time and did not say anything, which was unlike Pete entirely. They reached Port Callum's signal range on the 4th day, and that was when Warden 7 caught up to them. The patrol ship was larger than the Iron Meridian, newer, and better armed. Its commander was a man named Colonel Aldrich Voss, who spoke in the flat, precise way of someone who had spent a long time following regulations and believed that following them correctly was a form of virtue. He explained the situation calmly. Cal had an unregistered alien life form aboard. Regulations were clear. He had 2 options: release the creature into space, or surrender it upon boarding for transfer to a Coalition research facility. Cal listened to all of it. Then he said, very simply, no. There was a silence on the comms. Voss asked him to repeat himself. Cal repeated himself. The boarding party arrived 20 minutes later, 2 soldiers in full gear, professional and quick. Cal met them at the airlock. Pete was behind him, and Pete had a wrench in his hand that he was holding very casually, which meant he had decided something without telling anyone. The soldiers moved toward the med bay. Cal stepped in front of them. One of them pushed him into the bulkhead. Cal felt something in his side crack, a rib, probably, and his shoulder went numb from the stun baton. He did not move from the doorway. Pete threw the wrench at a conduit panel on the far side of the corridor. Sparks flew. Both soldiers turned. Nina locked the med bay door from the inside. From behind the locked door, Flint made a sound. It was not loud. It was low and even, and it went on for about 4 seconds. Cal could not describe it afterward, except to say that it made something in the back of his skull go very quiet. Both soldiers stopped moving. They stood completely still, looking at the door, not speaking. Voss's voice came through the corridor calm, "Fall back. We'll handle this through legal process." There was something careful in his voice now that had not been there before. The soldiers left. The ship was quiet. Cal slid down the wall and sat on the floor. His rib hurt badly. His shoulder still tingled. Nina came out of the med bay and started looking him over without being asked. Flint came out behind her and walked across the floor with its careful 6-limbed gait and put one small clawed foot on the back of Cal's hand. It left it there. His salvage license was suspended pending tribunal. The Iron Meridian was flagged. Pete sat down in the corridor across from him and said nothing, which was, Cal thought, one of the kindest things Pete had ever done. Port Callum was the kind of station that asked no questions if you did not wave your problems around in public. It was old and loud and smelled like 3 different kinds of food all at once, and the docking fees were reasonable if you knew who to talk to. Cal knew who to talk to. Nina had reached out to someone before they docked. She did it quietly, without making a big thing of it, the way Nina did most things. The person she reached was a woman named Dr. Lena Farrow, who worked out of a small office on Port Callum's lower ring and had spent 20 years writing papers that the Galactic Coalition politely ignored. Lena Farrow was small and fast-talking and had the kind of energy that suggested she had been waiting a long time for something to finally go right. When Nina brought her to the med bay and she saw Flint, she went completely still for about 10 seconds. Then she said, very quietly, "Oh." "Oh, you are real." She said it the way someone says something they have been told not to believe for a very long time. She told them what she knew over the next several hours, speaking quickly, stopping occasionally to look at Flint like she still could not entirely believe what she was seeing. Dragons, she said, were not extinct. They had never been extinct. The Coalition had known this for years, and the people who had tried to publish that information had found their research quietly buried, their funding pulled, their careers moved in other directions. Dragons had chosen to disappear from the visible galaxy. They watched. They remembered. They did not engage with the younger species unless something caused them to. And when one of them did engage with someone, Lena said, leaning forward with the intensity of someone delivering the most important sentence of their career, it was not symbolic. The oldest recovered texts, found in ruins that the Coalition had sealed off and classified, described it very specifically. Dragons did not just remember the past. They remembered forward. They saw the shape of what a life could be and, if they chose, they could reach into it. Pete, who had been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, said, "That sounds like something someone made up." Lena looked at him steadily. "A week ago I would have agreed with you." Flint had been sitting very quietly through all of this. It looked at Lena the way it sometimes looked at Cal, with that long, steady attention that felt like being read. Lena looked back, and her expression shifted into something that was almost reverent. That night, during the quiet hours when the station outside hummed low and the crew slept, Cal sat alone in the common area. His ribs still ached. His shoulder had mostly come back. He was drinking something warm and not particularly good and thinking about the tribunal that was coming and the shape his life would have after it. He did not hear Flint approach. He just looked down and the creature was beside him on the seat, having climbed up without making a sound. They sat like that for a while. Cal did not say anything because he did not have anything useful to say. Flint did not make any sounds either. The station made its low nighttime sounds around them. Then something happened that Cal would spend a long time trying to describe and never quite manage. The navigation console across the room lit up. Not all of it. Just a small section, a soft glow, like something waking up. Flint lifted its head and looked at it, and Cal felt the hum of the ship change slightly under him, the way a living thing's breathing changes when it makes a decision. The jump happened before anyone could stop it. Before anyone even understood it was happening. When the iron meridian came out on the other side, the star field was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. The stars were still stars, but the patterns were different, the angles unfamiliar. The navigation system searched for reference points and found none in any mapped database. What it did find, ahead of them, was structures. They were massive and dark and very old, shaped in ways that had nothing to do with efficiency or function the way humans understood it. They were shapes that seemed to have been made by something that thought about space differently than anything Cal had ever studied. They were not ruins exactly. They did not feel broken. They felt like something that had simply stopped being used. Pete came to the bridge first, then Nina, then Lena, who stood at the viewport and put both hands over her mouth. Flint had moved to the viewport before any of them. It stood with its nose close to the glass, looking out at the structures with an expression that Cal could only read as coming home. Cal came to stand beside it. He looked out at those vast old dark shapes and felt something he did not have a word for. Not fear, not wonder exactly, something between them. He said, quietly, without thinking about whether it was a strange thing to say, "What do you need from us?" Flint turned and looked at him with those gold eyes. Then it raised one small clawed limb and pressed it against the glass, pointing forward, toward the structures. Cal took a long breath. Then he said, "All right," and went to take the helm. The inside of the structure did not feel like the inside of a building. It felt like the inside of something that was still thinking. The air was not cold or warm. The light came from nowhere visible, a soft low glow that seemed to come from the material of the walls themselves, faint and even, like the light inside deep water. The corridors, if that was the right word, were wide and curved in ways that did not match any human design logic. There were no sharp corners. Everything curved and folded into everything else, as if whoever built it did not believe that space should end abruptly. Flint moved ahead of the crew, steady and certain, its six-limbed gait quiet on the floor. It did not hesitate at any junction. It knew exactly where it was going. At one branching of the corridor, It stopped and looked back at Cal, just Cal it waited. Nina started to follow. Flint made a small sound, not unkind, but clear. It looked at Nina, then at the corridor they had come from. Nina stopped. She looked at Cal. "Go," she said simply. Cal followed Flint alone. The chamber Flint led him to was smaller than he expected. Circular, with walls that curved up to meet at a high point above him. There was nothing in it that looked like technology or furniture or anything Cal had a word for. There were patterns on the walls, not writing, not images exactly. Shapes that shifted slightly if he looked at them from the edge of his vision, but were still when he looked directly. Flint walked to the center of the room and sat down. It looked at Cal and blinked, once, slowly. Cal walked to the center and stood there, feeling slightly uncertain, which was not a feeling he was used to. What happened next was not something he could describe with a sequence of events, because it did not happen like that. It happened the way understanding happens, all at once, and from a direction you were not expecting. He felt weight. Not physical weight. It was the weight of things that had gone wrong. A mission years ago, in the early days after he left the Marines. 2 crew members. A call he had made in 3 seconds that turned out to be the wrong one. He had not thought about it in a long time because thinking about it did not help anything. He had built a wall around it and worked around the wall, and that had been enough to keep going. The weight of it was in the room with him now. Not crushing. Not punishing. Just present. And then something shifted, not the memory, not the facts of what happened, but something around it. The weight was still there, but it was held differently. It was as if the room had taken the thing he had been carrying alone and said, "We see this. It happened. It is part of the record. You do not have to carry it the same way anymore." Other things followed. Smaller things. A ship he had lost not to a mistake but to bad luck, which had never felt different from a mistake until now. Words he had not said to people who were no longer reachable. Choices made quickly in difficult places that he had second-guessed every year since. None of it was undone. That was important. Cal understood, in the way you understand things in that kind of place, that nothing was being erased or changed. It was being witnessed. That was the word that came to him, witnessed. Something very old and very thorough had looked at the record of his life and seen it completely, including the parts he had tried not to look at himself. Outside the chamber, Lena was saying something to Nina that Nina was listening to very carefully. "They are not rewarding him," Lena said. "That is not what this is. There is a word in the recovered texts. It does not translate exactly, but the closest thing is correction. Like a record that had an error in it. His name was supposed to be here." She paused. "It just had not happened yet." Nina looked at the closed chamber entrance for a moment. "What does that mean for him?" Lena looked at her notes, then put them down. "I don't know exactly. I don't think the texts were written for people like us." In the chamber, Cal came back to himself slowly. He was on his knees without knowing when that had happened. There was blood on his upper lip. His right eye would not focus properly, and the edges of his vision had gone bright and strange. Flint was sitting on his chest. Not doing anything. Just sitting there, small and warm, radiating heat through the layers of his suit, its gold eyes very close to his face. The warmth was steady and even, and it was, Cal thought dimly, the most grounded he had felt in a very long time. After a while his eye cleared. After a while longer he could stand. He looked at Flint. Flint looked back at him. "Was that supposed to happen to me?" Cal asked. Flint blinked once. Slow and certain. Cal laughed. It surprised everyone in the corridor outside, who could hear it through the walls. It surprised Cal most of all. The tribunal was scheduled for 6 weeks after they returned to Coalition space. Cal dressed the same way he always dressed, ate breakfast, checked the ship systems, and went. He did not expect much. The charges were real. The evidence was real. Colonel Voss had filed everything correctly, which Cal grudgingly respected even as it was being used against him. The only question in Cal's mind was how much he was going to lose. What happened instead was harder to explain. The first problem for Voss's case was a documentation error, not a fraud, not a planted mistake, simply a filing that was wrong in a way it had not been wrong before. A critical piece of evidence against Cal, the bioscan alert and the ship log timestamps, had been recorded in a format that the Coalition's own regulations said was inadmissible unless confirmed by secondary systems. The secondary confirmation was missing. The Coalition lawyer on Cal's side, a tired woman named Diane Cole who had taken the case at low cost as a favor to Nina's family, found this on the morning of the second day and looked at it for a long time before saying anything. The second problem was a regulation that no one had cited correctly in 11 years. It had been on the books the whole time. It protected any sapient alien life form that had voluntarily placed itself under human protection. The word voluntarily was the key word, and the ship's medical logs, Nina's careful notes, which included detailed observations of Flint choosing to eat, choosing to follow, choosing to trust, made a strong case for the word applying. Diane Cole cited it. The tribunal panel looked at each other. One of them asked for a recess. The third thing was the Xenobiological Review Board. It had been inactive for 11 years. It was technically still a legal body, and when someone, no one was entirely sure who had filed the paperwork, formally requested a review of dragon species classification, the board was reconvened. Lena Farrow was invited as the first expert witness. She brought 20 years of research and spoke for 4 hours. Cal was not in the room for most of it, but Diane came out during the break and sat down beside him and said, very quietly, "I think you should start making plans for after this." "After I lose everything?" Cal asked. She gave him a small, careful look. "After you don't." The charges were dropped. Cal's license was reinstated. The Iron Meridian came off the flagged list. The Coalition, quietly and without making a statement, reclassified dragons as a protected and acknowledged sapient species, the first new classification of that kind in 30 years. Colonel Voss filed a formal objection, which was noted and filed away. Pete said, "Huh," when he heard the news, which was the most surprised Pete had ever sounded. They all knew what was coming before it happened. You do not spend weeks with something as aware as Flint and not learn to read it. Cal noticed the change in the way Flint moved, a little more purposeful, a little more like something finishing something up. He chose a specific coordinate himself. Open space, a long way from any station or ship lane. He took the Iron Meridian out there on a clear day and dropped to minimal thrust and waited. They all came to the common area without being asked, which told him that they had all felt it too. Nina stood near the viewport. Pete sat in his usual chair. Lena had a recorder that she then turned off and put away, because some things should not be documented. Flint came to Cal last. It climbed him the way it had only done once before, on the day Cal had first picked it up, slowly and carefully, from his arm to his shoulder to the top of his head, where it sat for a moment with its weight warm and certain against his skull. 30 seconds, maybe. Cal counted without meaning to. Then Flint climbed back down, walked to the viewport, and looked out at the stars for a long moment. And then it was gone. Not in a flash, not with sound or wind or light. One moment it was there, and the next it simply was not, the way a held breath is simply gone when you let it out. Cal stood at the viewport for a long time. Pete did not say anything. That was the kindest Pete had ever been. 6 months later, Cal was on a new salvage run. Different field, same kind of work. Nina was with him. Pete was with him. Lena had joined the crew as a research contractor and spent most of her time writing things down and asking questions that had no good answers, which fit in well enough. Cal moved through the wreckage carefully, his suit light cutting through the dark the same way it always had. He was not thinking about anything in particular when he found it, a piece of carved material, no bigger than his fist, half buried in broken metal. He could not identify what it was made of. It was not in any catalog he had access to. He picked it up. It was warm, even through his gloves, in the cold of the field. He turned it over in his hands. There were patterns on one side, not writing, not images. Shapes that shifted slightly when he looked at them from the edge of his vision, but stayed still when he looked directly. He bagged it carefully, labeled it, set it aside to look at later. He did not know what it was. He knew it mattered. He had learned, somewhere between a crushed wing and a rewritten record, that the things worth keeping do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they just sit in the wreckage and wait for someone to stop walking past.